So yeah, we'll skip my introduction since I've been introduced. I'm here on behalf of the Nomad Futures Foundation today. And the Nomad Futures Foundation is a nonprofit organization that aims to empower the next generation, that's you guys, to learn about the rapidly evolving world of digital infrastructure. Okay, so you guys have heard this word a lot now, digital infrastructure, and you might be wondering, okay, what exactly is that? Is she talking about like my phone, Wi-Fi? So if you're wondering that, you're in luck because my presentation today aims to explain what digital infrastructure is. Okay, so let's kick things off with a really easy question. How many of you guys, when you woke up this morning or even before you rolled out of bed, you opened Instagram or TikTok to scroll to just like wake yourself up? Yeah, no? Yeah, me too. I had to get up pretty early this morning to get here from Berkeley, so I definitely did a little bit of that. Okay, now another question. How many of you guys saw a piece of content, like a video, a reel that was posted by someone else, somewhere else in the world? Like, so not from the US, not from California, yeah, okay, I'm kind of surprised. Sometimes it can be a really domestic thing, the algorithm. Okay, have you guys ever wondered how that video got from that person's phone to your phone? You just kind of like, ooh, sorry, spoiler, clicked upload and it magically appeared on your phone, right? But how did that process actually happen? The answer to that is it's not actually magic. There's something called digital infrastructure that makes that process possible. It's not an invisible thing at all. And I'm going to explain that process today and explain what digital infrastructure is through this little video that I took when I was on a hike this summer. This is a yellow-bellied marmot, very cute, right? So obviously I wanted to post this guy or gal on my Instagram, on my story, to share with my friends. So let me explain the process of how that happens with the help of digital infrastructure. Okay, so we'll start off really easy. Like obviously you guys know, since I had no signal on the hike, I had to open my camera app. There was no going directly through Instagram, and I just took the video. No internet required, no signal required. Next step, when I was back in San Francisco and I did have signal, was to take that video that was stored locally in my phone storage in my photo gallery and open Instagram and click that upload to story button. Oh, and the aim for this is for me to post it on my story so that my friend in Suva, Fiji, all the way across the world in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so that he can see it. Okay, so when I click upload, there's a bunch of invisible processes, and well, they're not invisible, but we always think they're invisible. There's a bunch of physical infrastructure that comes into play. So the first thing that happens is, well, my mobile phone has a subscription with AT&T. That's my mobile service provider. So what happens is, my image, my video, needs to go on AT&T's network, and it gets wirelessly transmitted to that cell tower there. Well, potentially that cell tower, because as you can see in that map below, all those little green bubbles represent different cell towers. There's a lot of them in San Francisco. And you might think a cell tower looks like that little icon over there, right? Like it really has a tower shape. But when you're in a city, a lot of the time your cell tower is not really a tower. It's just equipment that's placed on the top of a skyscraper. So in the picture you can see there, that's the Bank of America building. And you need a lot of these cell towers in cities especially because there's a lot of users, there's a lot of data being transmitted, transferred, people uploading things, downloading things, just using the internet in general. And so AT&T, you can see it's a tier 1 operator. That means they have a massive network of cable, cell towers, and facilities. A lot of those green bubbles, not all of them, but a lot of them are AT&T's bubbles. So what happens then? Well, the next part of this is actually maybe kind of surprising because from this step onwards, actually, none of the connections are wireless anymore. They're all through cables. What happens is my image then goes underground via fiber optic cable to a co-location data center, potentially Digital Realty's data center at 365 Main Street. So this is a co-location data center, which means it's where different networks interconnect. That means Verizon's network comes here, AT&T's networks come here, and also other service providers that I might not have mentioned. And not just all these mobile service providers, also companies like Meta, wait, I'm kind of drawing a blank here, but all these app providers, like TikTok as well, they might have their data centers are all connected at a co-location data center. Okay, so I've said this thing called a data center. So what exactly is a data center? A data center is actually just a physical location, and specifically a physical location that houses information technology. So it could be a room, a building, a facility, even a set of buildings, and it houses information technology such as servers, switches, routers, etc. And data centers are typically networked, so that means like a co-location data center, they have access to other networks, and this allows them to store, compute, and utilize data for companies. That means, so we, the users of these applications and services that companies have, can also make use of these services. Okay, so going back to the little image journey, at this data center, the image is transferred between AT&T's network and Meta's network. Okay, on to the next part of the story. Meta now needs to store this image on its servers because, well, you see that building, it's kind of small. There's a lot of different networks being interconnected there. So with the amount of users and the amount of data that's being transmitted through Meta's network, it's not enough for all of the data that Meta needs to store. So this image then needs to potentially go to one of Meta's data centers, like in Oregon, and it goes to that data center through underground fiber optic cables again. Okay, and you can see in that photo that data center looks a lot bigger, and the image has changed. The icon's like slightly different. That's because it's a hyperscale data center. So what is a hyperscale data center? How does it compare to the data center we looked at before? Well, the big difference is the size. You can see that for the specific data center in Oregon that Meta has, it's 11 buildings that span 4.6 million square feet. That's equivalent to about 80 football fields. It's really, really, really big. And that's because it needs all that space to store all the equipment that's needed to do all the computation that Meta needs for its services. Also, I forgot to mention, but that's also why you can see in the little icon that you're not located in a city anymore. A lot of these data centers tend to be in rural areas because there needs to be more space to have these big facilities. Okay, now back to the story of the image again. Once the image has reached Meta's data center, let's imagine now that my friend has opened up Instagram on his phone in Fiji, and he's clicked on my story. What happens then? I have a question for you guys now. Do you think the next step is going to be underground cables or through satellites? Okay, raise your hand if you think it's going to be cables. Raise your hand if you think it's going to be satellites. Okay, it's pretty even. The answer is subsea cables. Okay, this might be pretty surprising to you guys, but 99% of international internet traffic is transmitted through cables. We always think that it's satellites, right? Because everything seems so invisible, wireless, like poof, one thing gets from there to the other. And you have, your Wi-Fi connection, it's all wireless, but it's actually not the case. It's all through cables. And so just a little bit more information about subsea cables. You can see they're pretty big from that photo over there. They're not like the sort of cable that you think about when you think about your charging cable, for sure. And a lot of the times they need to be protected, especially in shallow areas, because if one of these cables snaps, it really is detrimental to your internet connection. It can, in some cases, prevent an entire country from getting internet access. Okay, back to the story of the image again. So, after it's reached Meta's data center, it then begins on a journey underground via more fiber optic cables to a cable landing station on the coast of Oregon. In this case, I think the example here is of the Hillsborough cable landing station in Oregon. And once it's reached the cable landing station, it then goes on a slow journey on a submarine or undersea cable to Fiji's cable landing station. And in this particular case, the cable that we're talking about is the Southern Cross Cable Network. You can see that little map there. So the cable there, all those little dots that you see is where the cable comes ashore. So this cable comes ashore in Hawaii before it goes down to Suva, Fiji. Okay, and now we're on the last part of the journey here. So we first have the backhaul, which is where the international network comes back to the local network through the co-location data center, and then it goes via fiber optic cables again to the cell tower, and then by the cell tower, it's wirelessly transmitted in what we call the last mount. We call the last mount because it's the last hop from the user to the network, and it goes to my friend's phone, and ta-da, it's my story. Yay! Okay, so as you can see, digital infrastructure, it's mostly wired, it's mostly grounded actually, and buildings and under the ocean. And most digital transmissions, I hope you can see from this little analogy, they cross the networks of several companies. It's not just one company that's doing all the networking. There's a lot of different companies and services involved, and it requires coordination and interconnection across different infrastructures. Okay, so now that you guys have understood what digital infrastructure is, we don't want to just leave it at there. We all know, like our generation, that the future is digital, right? And it's not just enough for us to be understanding what the engine of today is. We are going to be the ones that are building the engine of tomorrow. So in this next segment, I'm going to encourage you guys through looking at some of the challenges that we face in digital infrastructure and think about how you guys want to be designing the networks of tomorrow. What are some of the considerations that we need moving forward?
In January of 2022, the underwater volcano Hunga Hunga Ha'apai produced the biggest atmospheric explosion seen in modern history. Scientists have had their eyes on this volcano ever since an eruption in 2015 joined two islands together. This recent eruption blew that bridge apart, inundating islands in Tonga with floods and a coat of ash and dust.
Okay, so as you can see from that video, the volcano eruption that occurred in Tonga, which is a Pacific island nation, was huge. It blew an entire island apart. But what I want you guys to focus on here is not just the eruption, but what happened because of the eruption, which is that people in Tonga didn't have internet for 5 weeks. Can you guys imagine not having any access to the internet for 5 weeks? I don't think I could do like 5 hours. So 5 weeks is a lot. And it's not just about not being able to access social media. It's also about the fact that people on the island, because they couldn't access internet banking services, didn't have access to their money. In Tonga, a lot of people's money comes from people from family members who are working overseas remitting their money back to them back home. And without the internet, that was impossible. People couldn't have access to their money for 5 weeks. Can you imagine that? And the reason why this happened was because the volcano eruption severed the Tonga cable, which you can see there, goes from Fiji to Tonga. And that's the only international connection that Tonga has to the rest of the world's internet. Because this cable was severed, no internet. We can't imagine that here, and it's for good reason. People in developed nations, or more developed nations, we are aware of the risks of being disconnected from the internet. That's why we have multiple cables, multiple international cables, to ensure that even if one goes down, another one's still able to route internet traffic and we still have access to the internet, even if it's a little slower. That's what we call redundancy. But in other nations, in other developing nations, and especially small island nations across the world, this isn't the case, because these cables are expensive. So what I want you guys to think about here is, how can we build resilient, inclusive networks? The internet shouldn't just be for people who can. The internet in the digital world is not just for us, it's for everybody. So how can we build networks that allow for that? One of the answers that people are turning to is the use of satellites. So as you can see, in these headlines, satellites are being used in regions like Africa and in the Pacific Islands, but also in rural parts of America. Okay, another question. How much water do you think ChatGPT uses to write an email?
A lot.
A lot, yeah. Okay, how many people drink like a teaspoon, a tablespoon,
1 liter.
a cup, 1 liter? Okay. That's a little bit of an overestimation. But the answer is, according to a post by the Washington Post, it takes about 1 bottle, like that Pure Life bottle over there, to write a 100-word email using an AI chatbot that uses ChatGPT-4. And also, you can see in the other headline that saying please and thank you reportedly cost ChatGPT OpenAI tens of millions of dollars. Oh, and the reason why it takes this much water is because you need all of this water, not just for cooling the equipment, because when you use your laptop, it gets heated up really quick, so you have to multiply that effect over tens of millions of servers. But also for power generation. That means all the electricity that it takes to run these computers. Okay. And actually, that post is a little bit of an overestimation, at least according to Sam Altman's blog, who's the CEO of OpenAI. He says that it actually only takes about a teaspoon of water for a query to ChatGPT, but we don't know what exactly that query is. Maybe he's only asking 1 word. We don't know. But the point is that it adds up. In 2024, Google's sustainability report reported that they used approximately 31 billion liters of water. And Microsoft used approximately 10.3 billion liters of water. And how much water does that equate to? To put things in perspective, that's about showering for 7,370 years, or the water needs of about 29 million people. So it might not seem like a lot, but when you think about, I think we're all pretty reliant on ChatGPT these days. If you think about how those queries add up, it can be a lot of water. And it's important to think about that in the big picture. Because a lot of these data centers, they're actually placed in regions where maybe they shouldn't be. Yeah, I guess we all know because we're in California, right? But a lot of places experience drought, and a lot of places don't have access to clean, accessible drinking water. So if you're placing data centers there that are guzzling up the water, well, it's not great news for the communities that live there. You can see in that headline over there, their water taps ran dry when Meta built next door. That means Meta was literally drawing the groundwater, and there was not enough for the residents of these communities. But thankfully, this doesn't really need to be the case anymore. One aspect is, of course, making sure that you're choosing places where, maybe water isn't such a big problem, isn't such a big issue, there's more a greater abundance of water, and also working with communities to make sure that their concerns are addressed. But also, with the advent of efficient cooling technologies, you might not need to even be using as much water. And also, the large language models these days that companies like OpenAI are developing, they use less power, which requires less water, and that's a really good thing. Also, renewable energy. I'm sure you guys know all about that, but because data centers use so much electricity, it's necessary for us to think about how this electricity that they're using is being generated. You don't want to be emitting a ton of carbon emissions from, trying to get ChatGPT to write your email. Okay, so we've talked about how AI data centers can impact the environment, but what about the other way around? How about how the environment can impact digital infrastructure? So you can see in that video over there and this slide that we're talking about the 2024 Rio Grande floods. So what happened is this was a humongous flooding event in Brazil. It was very catastrophic, and it was the country's worst flooding in over 80 years. But what I'm focusing on very specifically is how this impacted digital infrastructure, which is in that data centers, including some data centers where critical services like banking, for example, like I was talking about in the Tonga example, they were reliant on these data centers, but because the area was flooded, people couldn't access these data centers. And at first they thought, oh, it's chill because there's backup power generators. But then the flooding and the raining didn't stop. And eventually people realized, oh, our power generators are going to run out of diesel. And then what happens? We are not going to be able to have any internet to coordinate search and rescue efforts. We're not going to have any internet to coordinate finances for aid. And so the people in these areas had to literally canoe and then set up a pulley system so that they could get fuel to these data centers, which were on high up in buildings, thankfully, because if they hadn't been high up, well, the data center would have been gone from the get-go because it would have been flooded. So what I'm wanting us to talk about here is how can we build climate-resilient networks? Flooding isn't the only climate threat to digital infrastructure. There's many. In heat waves, your data centers, they don't work very well. It's like your laptop overheating, right? And when you multiply that across thousands of critical services, the result isn't good. And another concern to think about is also not just about the infrastructure themselves, because you can just, build it higher, build some flood defenses, but what happens when the power outage? What happens when power goes out? If you don't have electricity, these data centers can't run to even begin with. There's a lot to think about in this slide, and with climate change, extreme weather events becoming more frequent, it's something that the network is going to have to build itself to be resilient against. Okay, here's where you guys come in. A little fun fact about the industry. I don't know if I should, okay, basically everybody's really old in this industry, okay? There's a little bit of a history behind it with it's what they call the dot-com boom, but I won't get into that. But we need new people. Yes, from young, fresh talent to be thinking about how we want to build the digital infrastructure of tomorrow. And so, from Nomad Futurists, these are some of the places in which you can be part of that next digital engine. Okay, now some of the information about Nomad Futurist. So yeah, Nomad Futurist was founded in 2021, and it basically aims to bridge this gap between digital infrastructure and the public and the next generation. Because as you guys have seen in this presentation, a lot of people don't really realize that digital infrastructure exists. And so hopefully through engaging with the foundation, you guys will come to learn more about digital infrastructure and become interested in it. All right, thank you guys so much for having me here today. I'm really happy.
All right, we have some time for questions. Thank you. I think they're really interesting.
So you said at the beginning of your presentation, when you're talking about the mobile network, that AT&T was a tier 1 operator. What entails being a tier 1 operator, and what are the other tiers if there are?
Okay, the tier system is basically just about the extensiveness of your infrastructure. I'm not sure what the tier scale goes up to for mobile networks specifically, but tier 1 just basically means you're a main service provider. So there you have that extensive network of infrastructure. Hope that was illuminating enough response. It's not, yeah, it's quite straightforward, I feel.
What do the underwater cables look like? Are they big? Or if you were to go swimming, could you see them?
Okay, if you go swimming, okay, first of all, you probably wouldn't see them if you go swimming because they tend to be in areas where they don't want you to see them. because they don't want them to get damaged by anything. So wait, let me go back to the slide about subsea cables. Okay, in the image on the bottom right, that's of them when they're laying the cable. So you can kind of see there, like, what the size is like. But, sorry, I'm kind of forgetting the rest of your question, but that's in terms of the size, and most of the time they want to get these cables underground to deep water as fast as they can, because one of the main threats to cables, cable damage and cable breakage, is ship anchors. So they want to get these cables very deep enough as quickly as possible so they don't get damaged by boat anchors. Does that answer your question?
How often the cables need to be like redone, like they erode over time?
Wait, sorry, I can't see who asked the question. Okay, hi. Okay, so cables actually last a really long time if they're not damaged. The main thing is if they're damaged, they need to be redone almost immediately because it really affects your internet traffic. But potentially some cables are still in operation that have been laid in like 2001, for example. So they can last a really long time. It's just that with the amount of internet traffic that we have nowadays, people are constantly laying new ones because the number of users, the amount of data that's being transmitted across these cables, people want faster and faster internet, and there's more and more information that's being uploaded on the net or being transferred to the net. Yeah, go ahead, right here.
What's your major and how did you discover digital infrastructure as a sector?
Okay, yeah, I'm an environmental science and data science major, and I actually was like you guys. I didn't really know. Well, I'm assuming like you guys because maybe some of you did actually know about digital infrastructure before this. But I only found out about digital infrastructure through my research at Berkeley. At Berkeley, I'm part of the Sustainable Subsea Networks group that does undergraduate research about subsea networks, so undersea cables, and it was only through looking at research in Berkeley that I really started to get to know about digital infrastructure. Yeah.
So after the water is used for like cooling, where does the water go? Does it just evaporate?
Oh, yeah, okay, that's a great question. Nowadays, with more efficient technology, they really try to reuse the water. Because if you only use clean water once and then you just discharge it back into the system, it's really wasteful, right? So nowadays they're trying, it's called gray water, essentially, like the discharge water. And the companies want to, and engineers really want to reuse that water and get as much mileage out of the water as they can before it gets discharged back into the system. But typically it will go through like a cleaning process before it goes back into like the water mains. Yeah. Oh, here, hang on.
Why don't they just use like seawater for the cooling?
That actually is a thing. Like that's one of the technologies that companies are looking into. It's just I can't speak to this in too much detail because I'm not an engineering major and I don't really know too much about this technology specifically. But that is one of the innovations that they're trying to look at, to use seawater instead of desalinated water, because obviously that's less of a drain on drinkable water supply. But because seawater is salinated, there's different properties to that pose more of an engineering challenge.
Whether it's like salinated or not, though, if it lands on like the circuit board, it's still gonna corrupt it because it can interact with like the chemicals, and it'll still like it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, because it's for cooling, right? Okay, I can't. So I'm really sorry that I can't speak more to that, but yeah, it doesn't go directly on the circuit board because it's for cooling.
We'll take two more. One here.
I was gonna ask, earlier you said that the industry is really old. Why is that?
Okay, it's something called the dot-com boom. Basically, like when the internet first came about, people were really excited about it. They wanted to invest in a lot of infrastructure to do with. Sorry, wait, where are you? Someone speak to me. Okay, hi, yeah. They wanted to invest a lot of money into digital infrastructure because they thought the internet was going to be the next big thing, and it was. But before that happened, what happened was there was a financial crisis because people were speculating about the internet, and a lot of these projects didn't come through, they failed, and so people pulled all their money out of digital infrastructure. And this is also in time with like the 2008 recession. And so basically what happened is there was a whole generation of college graduates who didn't go into the digital infrastructure industry. And so there was a lack of talent drawn into the industry for a very long time. And so that's part of why the industry is so old now. A lot of them are past retirement age. And then now currently the other thing that is an issue is people don't really know about digital infrastructure. People always think about, oh, I want to be a software engineer to work in AI. I want to, before that it was about, coding. And because the digital infrastructure is kind of invisible, people don't really know about the industry, and that's also been a huge challenge.
Right, and then last one right here.
How is Nomad Futurist affecting students in classrooms to want to join digital infrastructure work?
The platform has a lot of great resources for you guys to learn about digital infrastructure. I would say is the main thing. There's a lot of resources on there that I would encourage you to check out. Some of the slides that I didn't show. Okay, never mind, sorry, they're hidden. But they have some other, they have a podcast, they have I forgot what it's called, they have another academy where you guys can learn more about digital infrastructure. So there's also great resources on the website.
Yeah, and I think they'll have a table on Friday at the technology showcase too. So if you guys want to learn more, you can talk to them one-on-one on Friday. So thank you so much, Stephanie. Carol.
All right, so what happens now is a few of the classes are gonna go back to their